One piece that I came up with was around on-chain governance, where I remember multiple meetings in the first year where we talked optimistically about how we could get rid of the foundation and replace it with a set of smart contracts, and we just needed to get to the point where we had sufficient functionality so that we could do on-chain voting around protocols, et cetera. I describe myself as on that issue somewhere between Vlad and Gavin Wood.
Oh, I live between the North Pole and the South Pole too. What a coincidence.
Exactly. And Vitalik is also between those two. I think we're all much closer to Vlad, or the two of us are much closer to Vlad. So I think I've heard Vitalik say that he doesn't think there should be on-chain governance, and I feel that we should strive to moving some governance on-chain, some voting systems, et cetera. And so I don't know if that's still true, if we can prudently build enough infrastructure over time so that we can start making decisions in that sort of context.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
That's no fun. We're not very good at coming up with
I'm still waiting for him
solutions.
to answer that.
Yeah, no, and I just really can't think of anything else on this one, unfortunately.
It's all good. There's a lot of stuff that's happened in this space, from kind of what we initially saw the dApp ecosystem would do to where DeFi is now. Out of curiosity, kind of having been part of Consensus and kind of seeing that evolve over the last few years, what would you say, Joe, just kind of some lessons learned from how DeFi is evolving, and kind of where do you think people should focus on in this space as projects that are working on DeFi, to like some lessons anywhere from regulation to the development side of it that they might not know as new entrants into this space?
So the ICO phenomenon was awesome, yet problematic in certain ways. One way we tried to address some of the difficulties was by starting up a project called TrueSet, which was designed to source, and Masari's sort of similar, designed to source information from the ecosystem so that we would have the critical pieces of information about different protocols, new ICOs, who the actual human beings are, you know, what the total number of issued tokens are, et cetera. And so, so that's one thing we're trying to do with a project called DeFi Score, where we essentially rate different money Lego parameters, essentially. And so DeFi is just so spectacular. I feel like so Ethereum and maybe some other massively decentralized protocols are a new trust foundation for the planet. On that new trust foundation, we need to build a financial plumbing layer, and that's what DeFi, open decentralized finance, is doing. And so we have all these protocols for so many things, from prediction markets to insurance to decentralized exchange to derivatives to synthetics to licensing to payments to automated portfolio management. It's just astonishing. And all of that, once we work it out and get it really functional, is going to be a massive magnet that draws in the rest of the world, either new business models or legacy businesses, and essentially becomes the decentralized global economy. And so that layer needs to innovate somewhat, hopefully permissionlessly, and I hope we can do a lot of that around the world, but it also needs to pay attention to what regulators are thinking and doing, because they're all watching now quite intensely. And so lots of those projects are VC funded, and so they're going to have to figure out how to balance innovation and being in a regulated environment, and that's something that Consensus is pretty good at. And so we're taking perhaps we have a lot of lawyers that spend a lot of time in Washington, so we run all of our ideas, for better or worse, through that group.
Awesome. DeFi is definitely one of the kind of the topics in talks at the town right now. What are some other things that you're kind of excited about or hopeful for in the next year or so with respect to Ethereum ecosystem growing?
One of them is just kind of increased privacy. So we've been seeing like Tornado Cash as one example, and I think we're going to see better ones soon. And this is something that the Ethereum ecosystem is starting to really recognize the need of, and especially since we have a lot of things like ENS popping up, and we have more and more kind of richer types of transactions happening, and I think there's definitely kind of a growing realization of the need to not have all of your activity be publicly linkable to all of your other activity. So that's one thing. And another thing is also security. And there's different kinds of security. Like, for example, we started caring about smart contract security quite a bit more after the DAO. And so far it seems to have paid off. And we've seen much fewer kind of unfortunate splats recently than we have before, recent flash loan stuff notwithstanding. But then there's also like user account security, for example, and I've been a kind of consistent evangelist for things like smart contract wallets, multi-sig, social recovery, and all of these things. And we've seen Argent, we've seen tools like the gas station network to help facilitate these things, and a lot of other interest in smart contract wallets, so that's been good, and I kind of hope to see more of that. Also, exchanges, another big example. So the kind of non-custodial exchanges happening more and more. So Uniswap is obviously kind of the first one, and that was completely decentralized. But now more recently, Loopring just launched a few days ago, and they're based on ZK rollup. So you actually have this property where, and even if the server misbehaves or the server disappears, they can't do anything bad, and users can still take all of their money out, which is amazing, and that's something that I hope that all exchanges will adopt in the medium term, and I think if they do, then we'll see a lot fewer kind of large splats of people losing funds of a different kind, and yeah, just user experience and all of those things improving at the same time. I think we'll just see kind of ongoing great improvements to just the ecosystem and people's ability to use Ethereum.
It's a lot to be excited about. So I'm going to go with two. One is, and I should probably stop calling them enterprise. Let's call them maybe non-blockchain native companies. I expect to see many large ones and medium-sized ones getting really excited about doing something significant, some piece of their business on public mainnet. The other piece is a little more esoteric. So we have a very large number of people at Consensus who are working on different Ethereum 2 projects. The Quilt team is working on phase 2, and we even have a designer who has some specialty in developer experience. And so being able to make some statements about what developer experience will be like on Ethereum 2 and what some of the early execution environments might be like. I look forward to seeing some interesting releases on that in maybe Q3, Q4 of this year.
That is a lot of stuff to be excited about. And I guess the best part of this is that because so much of this is composable, you do get a lot of compounded pace in terms of development, and you can still hope for a lot of things happening in just a few months. The next section I want to actually cover is a section we call underrated, overrated, and the way it's going to work is I'll throw out a topic. Each of you have to comment on, is this underrated or overrated, and then 1 to 2 lines on why. And you can kind of feel free to answer however you please, and then we'll kick this off actually with public goods funding.
I think we've been talking about it a lot, but probably still underrated on net. I don't know, public goods are important, man.
So underrated, I think we have mechanisms that can massively magnify that, as we've seen on Gitcoin, and also mechanisms that can identify externalities and bring them under the tent, essentially, to be calculated.
That's great. I like the brief responses. ZK rollups.
I think underrated. I think rollups in general are cool, and we've seen in the last month kind of a lot of well-deserved hype from on optimistic rollups with teams like Arbitrum and Optimism doing a lot of great work. So the thing about ZK rollups in particular, right, is that they have some advantages, like you don't have to rely on fraud proofs, and instead you just rely on these kind of ZK snarks to just prove validity of things immediately. And over the last few weeks in particular, there's been some kind of quiet but very significant improvements in just zero-knowledge proofs and of ability to quickly verify more general kinds of computation. So the general problem with ZK rollups is that historically, like even for specific applications, I remember Loopring gave the numbers that their cost of a transaction was 0.3 cents for on-chain data and 0.3 cents for the proving time. And recently, they've just optimized that proving time by more than an order of magnitude. And for general purpose computation, which is kind of much more expensive now, and as I mentioned, there's these kind of quiet improvements along the pipeline happening that seem like they'll bring us considerably closer to having a kind of general purpose virtual machine that you can do zero-knowledge proofs over. So I'm quite excited overall.
Yeah, so underrated will eventually be more elegant, more universal, more immediate, more comprehensive. Will take longer to get all that done.
ProcPal.
So I have a better suggestion for how we do Ethereum governance. How about Joe and I have a fist fight on stage, and if Joe wins, ProcPal gets
Fists?
implemented.
I'm worried about coronavirus.
Yeah,
Can we kick each other?
Sure. I don't know, no other
Answer that question, or
We call that diplomacy. Flash loans.
so we're not answering ProcPal?
It's,
I want to hear.
So I think I heard flash loans are really interesting. Like, it's interesting because you have this sort of new kind of financial primitive that just doesn't exist in any other context just because of kind of fundamentally what it is. Like it's a loan that you have to pay back within the same transaction. And yeah, and it seems to have had some really cool effects. But, we'll see how that survives kind of sharding and more reliance on asynchronous transactions there, but we'll see.
Where are you going to go with that?
I was just going to say.
Are we still on ProgPow or Prog Flash loans, or what's my question?
Flash loans.
Flash loans. Flash loans are just awesome. There will be so much complication in figuring that out. I think we're going to have to go slow and have a lot of cross-project communication, collaboration, and maybe even dumb down some of the protocols a little bit and make slow progress.
That's great. Similarly, I guess on the same theme, decentralized oracles.
I think we definitely need more work on those.
Definitely outside the kind of how we want this to work, but what's kind of missing? Like, what does it mean to get more work done? Is it just more people should be working on them, or we need structural problems to be solved?
More different kinds of Oracle designs, kind of explore the design space better, try to come up with oracles that are more secure and more decentralized, and good ways of using them.
Yeah, so what I haven't seen yet is a framework for what kinds of use cases need what kinds of rigor with respect to oracles. And so whether it's with respect to value or the valence of decision-making in a political context or something like that, if we had that framework, then we could come up with classes of oracles where it's fine to have anybody send in some information, or some sort of branded entity that has stake in their organization could be useful for some things, like ESPN for sports or something like that, all the way up to something that's very rigorously or massively decentralized for high value things.
Next up is EIP 1559. And I guess before you answer that, would either of you want to tell the audience about what that is?
Sure. So EIP 1559 is this proposal for reforming the way that fee markets work, where instead of having a fixed gas limit and kind of per block and maximally volatile transaction fees, you have this kind of flexible system where you have a gas limit which is twice as large or possibly 3 times as large as a kind of gas target. And so if there's short-term spikes in kind of volatility of demands, then instead of all of that turning into transaction fee volatility, some of it turns into just volatility of block space usage. And so transaction fees become more stable. It also fixes the kind of first price auction problem that we have with fee market design right now, where it's just really hard to figure out what fee a transaction should include. And then most people end up putting fees that are fairly low, and they end up waiting a few blocks. And it turns out that that waiting doesn't actually do any good to the blockchain. It just means it gets loaded a bit later instead of getting loaded a bit earlier. And so there's a lot of kind of inefficiency that's there for no reason. And EIP 1559 just kind of fixes a bunch of all of those things at once.
So underrated?
Yeah, underrated.
Yeah, so Vitalik came up with the idea. Eric Connor ran
Sense a
with
bit
it,
of bias here.
wrote it up. One of the few ideas in the Ethereum ecosystem that Vitalik came up with. And so it's a really exciting one. Early on, we took various advice from professionals about not talking about the Ether, the Ethereum token, in certain ways. And we were really interested in promoting developing, rather than focusing on the more financial aspects, say of the Bitcoin ecosystem. And it is simply a fact that a strong Ether secures our ecosystem better, draws more attention to our ecosystem, draws more talent to our ecosystem. And we've never tried to do anything artificial to prop up the price of Ether. This is a pretty exciting natural way to improve the protocol that also has probably very positive impact on the price of Ether.
And kind of just from that, the last topic for this section, Bitcoin on Ethereum, underrated or overrated?
I think underrated. I think it's definitely, it would be nice to see more versions of kind of Bitcoin on top of Ethereum happening with kind of different and better kinds of trust models. Like right now, we just have basically centralized ones. Like, can we go at least up to a federation? Can we go up to something crypto economic? I think it would be good to see more of those things.
Yeah, so Ether is currently the bandwidth for permissionless decentralized finance, and more bandwidth for permissionless finance is a great thing, so underrated.
So I just noticed that there were no overrated answers here. So since Vitalik one comment on ProcPow, what's one thing that you think is overrated in this ecosystem right now?
Overrated, underrated questions?
That's a good one. I don't know. I mean, to be fair, I think some of the answers kind of implicitly were correctly rated.
It doesn't have to be binary, but
No, I mean, even like DeFi in general is correctly rated, I think.
I guess our entire ecosystem and everything we do is presently underrated.
I'm looking for specifically overrated.
Can anyone out there come up with something in our ecosystem that's overrated? Private blockchains.
Okay. Since I won't repeat it, it's not on the audio. That's all right. We'll get this to the audience questions.
So nobody came up with answers.
Nobody came up with an answer. I'm not sure if that's a good
It's an
thing or a bad thing.
ecosystem that is still immature, still nascent, and still massively underrated.
That's actually exciting. Final question before we move on to the Q&A from the audience. What is both of your favorite memories of working with each other through the early days of Ethereum?
Do you have any? I don't really do favorite memories, but
I don't know, just like about a lot of like time we spent together in places like Switzerland.
yeah, that was great. Just getting shit done together. That's kind of what we both do. So two things, and just have to be careful how they're expressed because people are involved and stuff. One, for a long time, people didn't think that Vitalik had a sense of humor, and it was obvious from early on that he has a pretty impressive sense of humor. So as people started realizing that and being just shocked by it, that was kind of amusing to some of us who knew him and saw him cracking jokes all the time. And early on, just some of the politics on the project was interesting, where people were starting to manipulate each other, and Vitalik one time just said something about how, like, these different patterns of how people were trying to manipulate him. He just said it in a meeting, and it was just very funny to everybody that he was just so aware of what was going on.
I think Ethereum maximalism is slightly overrated.
That's great. Straight from the source. With that, thank you so much. We'll
Proof of work is overrated.
proof of work is overrated. Okay, there we go. This is gonna get.
We
some
found
points.
one. I love proof of work, but it is overrated by some people. Yeah.
Wonderful.